country and for the global system. For the global system, we know any individual country, in general, they take their domestic needs as the criterion for their policies. And under that kind of situation, the global economy may have to pay the cost of some narrow interest of this reserve currency country. But at the same time, it also has some cost for the reserve currency country. Because if they do not manage the economy well, then they will lose the status as a reserve currencies and cause a collapse in its exchange rate, in its currency, and so on. So it's a danger there. So I think that this kind of issue will be there. There's going to be a lot of discussion. But is the international reserve currency the answer to all the issue? I don't think so, because even we have an international reserve currency, the issue of too big to fail will still be there. For example, suppose this time, we have a reserve currencies, and the U.S. economy was in a bad shape. U.S. economy still was about 25% of global GDP. If the U.S. economy collapsed, it will be a heavy downward pressure for all the economy in the world. And under that kind of situation, the international authority will need to come up to rescue U.S. economy. Just like, AIG, or the financial institutions are so big. They are so big, the government in the U.S. has no other choice but come to bail out. So I don't think that we can find a solution that solves all the issue. Maybe we need to come up, we need to be realistic, pragmatic, and to understand the benefit, at the same time find a way to reduce its adverse impact. But we cannot have a solution that solves all the problems.
Presumably that will happen gradually anyway. I mean, obviously at this time of crisis, people have bought dollars, but I guess the lesson is diversification's not a bad idea.
That's more likely. Actually, personally, I think an ideal system might be we have several international currencies, all have similar status as a reserve currencies. And under that kind of situation, if we only have one reserve currency, that this reserve currency country has some monopoly power, and other people need to, in a way, to suffer no matter what this country do. But if we have several reserve currency competing with each other, then there's alternative. If the government did not do well in its macro policies, then the country can choose to replace this with other currency without much shock in the whole system. So this kind of several currency that have similar status, similar size might be most desirable system.
A basket of reserve currencies.
Right.
But there are only a few really that are possibly big enough, or that are liquid enough on a global scale.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously the euro
and
yen,
future maybe
the renminbi, the rupee,
and the dollars.
Speaking of shock, I mean, what impact on Chinese economic policy development has the global crisis had? Because obviously some people on the outside have criticized China for not freeing up financial markets more.
Yeah.
And that's been a debate for 20 years.
Yeah.
Has the Chinese economic reform sensibility actually changed in the last 6 months in a conceptual way because of the crisis?
I think that, if you look back, now we are in a crisis. In the other day, I was invited to a panel to discuss this issue. Certainly, the best way is to have sustained development without crisis. And when I proposed this proposition, many people say, how can you have growth development without crisis? However, if you look back in the history, Japan from 1950s to 1990s, 40 years of rapid growth without financial crisis.
The oil shock, I guess. Was
oil shock, but it's not financial crisis. Right. And they turned from a middle-income country to one of the highest-income countries. Again, Korea. From 1960s to 1997, 37 years of rapid growth without financial crisis. Their business cycle, very small. And China, from 1979 to now, again 30 years, rapid economic growth without financial crisis. So it seems to be possible. And if you look into those countries that sustain growth without financial crisis, there's one thing in common. That is, they did not liberalize their capital account. They did not liberalize their financial sectors. And if we look into other countries, whenever they liberalize the financial sectors, then financial crisis becomes something very frequent. So maybe we need to learn more about why, capital account liberalization always make the financial crisis more frequent, especially in a developing country.
So hot money, basically?
I think hot money. I use one analogy. For the developing country, certainly to grow, they need to have capital. And the capital is just like water, very important for the growth of the plant. But if you have too much water, then it can be drowned. And if you take water away, it will be drowned. And to open up the capital account, to allow the capital account liberalization, very often the hot money will flow in too quickly and cause other bubble and so on. And the bubble burst, all the hot money will withdraw, and then you are going to be left with a drought. So that is the reason, I think that might be the reason why, capital account liberalization need to be something very cautious. And fortunately, Chinese government has been quite cautious about capital account liberalization.
Well, presumably the Chinese government is going to be even more cautious now.
That might be right.
But it's, now, obviously you're the chief economist of the World Bank, and you're not an investment advisor.
No.
No.
Yeah.
But conceptually...
Yeah. Conceptually, as I mentioned...
Would you buy bonds or equities now?
Well, I never make investment in that way. I have no time to worry about...
But in terms of inflation and macroeconomic...
Yeah.
Which is...
Well, I can tell you a story. Robert Shiller, everyone said that he predicted the collapse of the internet bubble. And he had a book called a very famous book. What's the name of the book?
So famous that...
Yeah, okay. He had a book to predict that the collapse of the internet bubble.
Yeah.
And his book was translated into Chinese. And there was a book launch. I was invited to comment on his book. And I raised one question. I said, Bob, everyone said that you predict the collapse of internet bubble. And I asked him, did you make a fortune from the stock market? Because if you can predict the collapse of the market, it could be billionaire. But he told me that he did not make money from the stock market. Then I asked him that, well, then you have so many professors in the US teaching financial economics. As a group, do they make more money than other investors in the stock market? And then after some thought, he told me, from what he see, they did not make more money than common investors. And then I said, then why should we study financial economics? Because no matter you study or not, you cannot make more money than the other people. Since I know I'm not going to make more money than the other people, so I'm not going to invest in the stock market.
Oh, but you can give objective advice. I was talking to someone who had a role at the Harvard Endowment, and I said, well, what was the most important thing that you learned when you were running the Harvard Endowment? And he said, to make sure that I never listened to Harvard Economist.
The same spirit, right?
Well, Justin's been very, very generous with his time. We should be very, very generous with our applause. Thank you. Thank you very much.